Thank you very much for that introduction, Alan. On behalf of Halton Master Gardeners, I would like to begin today's Lunch and Learn session by acknowledging that Halton Region is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, and is directly adjacent to Haldimand Treaty Territory. As gardeners, we recognize our responsibility to honor, respect, and protect the land, its waters, plants, and animals, and acknowledge its traditional guardians. So as Alan said, my topic today is on beneficial insects and how we can use them as a resource in our gardens to help manage pests. So insects are important. At any time, it's estimated that there are some 10 quintillion individual insects alive. And just in case you were curious to know, 10 quintillion is actually 10 followed by 18 zeros. So it's a very large number. And only 1% of the insects in our gardens are actually harmful. The other 99% are either benign or beneficial. They're harmful because they consume our plants, they introduce disease, they bite our flesh, feed on our pets, and cause economic and aesthetic damage. It should be remembered, though, that all insects, including pests, contribute to a healthy ecosystem. So insects are declining, and some of the reasons that I'm sure you've heard before many times are due to climate change, the use of insecticides and herbicides, light pollution, invasive species, and changes in agriculture and land use. Many scientists have been trying to raise the alarm about this problem over the last several years, and unfortunately, they haven't really been able to make a whole lot of headway. So what can, sorry, I'll go back here. So what can home gardeners do to help? One of the things they can do is practice, I wanted to get that out of my way, thank you. They can practice conservation biocontrol, which is a term that describes the use of a pest's own natural enemies, those so-called beneficial insects, to help manage pest problems. And these things can be used along with other methods in the garden, such as cultural controls, which is essentially just taking good care of your plants, maintaining proper irrigation, dealing with fertility needs, sanitation, all of the things that lead to optimum plant health. And there are also physical controls that many gardeners use to manage pests in the garden. Everything from removing pests, so hand picking or water sprays. Many vegetable gardeners use netting and row covers to prevent pest insects from laying their eggs on their vegetables. And chemical controls are always something that we want to use as a last resort. So who are these good bugs? They are the common garden pests who, sorry, just trying to get rid of that. They are the insects that feed on common garden pests or use pests to house and feed their developing young. So here we have just a cross-section of some beneficial insects that potentially could be in our gardens already. So on the right-hand side at the top, we have a damsel bug. These insects are neither ladylike nor delicate. In fact, they have raptorial forelegs that they use to catch their prey, and then a mouth part called a rostrum, which they use to actually suck the contents of the prey insect, and that's how they consume them. On the bottom left-hand side is a photo of a tomato hornworm, and it's being parasitized by a braconid wasp. So in this case, the wasp will lay its eggs inside the hornworm. They will hatch and become larvae and essentially eat the contents of the hornworm, and then they spin a cocoon and pupate and emerge as adults to start the process all over again. On the right-hand side is the yellow garden spider, which is a very common spider in our Southern Ontario gardens. And as you can see, it's managed to catch a prey insect in its web. And these insects are good bugs also because they're pollinators. So along with bees, they do pollinate our plants. Many of them need nectar and pollen as adults, mainly for energy and also for procreation. So if they do provide a very important service of pollinating flowers, vegetables, etc. And so they would be sorely missed if they were not part of that ecosystem. How does the predator-prey cycle work? Similar to antelopes and lions in the African savanna, actually. When pests find suitable plants to feed on, they multiply and become more plentiful. Predators notice and approach looking for a meal. As they feed, the pest numbers decline. At this point, both populations are in balance and the ecosystem is stable. The goal for eco-friendly gardeners is to work with nature as much as possible to maintain that balance between pests and beneficial insects. Scientists have for some time been aware of the communication that goes on between insects. For instance, when one insect emits pheromones if it's looking for a mate, they're becoming increasingly aware of the communication across kingdoms, so from plants to insects. And this diagram illustrates that situation. These odors, I guess you could call them, that plants emit are called herbivore-induced plant volatiles. And so what happens is you have a plant on the left-hand side here with what looks like a caterpillar. It emits these HIPVs into the atmosphere. As they go forward, they degrade to a certain extent. But if they reach an insect within their range, and that insect is interested in consuming the pest insect, then it should be able to find its way back to the plant. So in the next section, I'm going to go through some common predators and parasitoids that can be found in our gardens. Both of these groups consist of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of different species. So the first insect that I'm going to talk about is the green lacewing. It's a very beautiful insect, as you can see from the net-like wings that it has. It's between 15 and 25 millimeters, so roughly a ½ inch to an inch in size. That's the size of the adult. This insect has a complete life cycle, which means that it goes through 4 stages. It starts out as an egg, becomes a larva, and then a pupa, and then finally an adult. There are roughly 25 species of lacewings in Canada, and the most common species is the common green lacewing, and its Latin name is Chrysoperla carnea. So as you can see from the bottom photo here, the eggs are green to gray in shape. And they're typically attached by a 1/4 inch filament to the underside of leaves. And it's thought that the reason that they're attached in this way is because they're extremely predaceous when they hatch. And so it's a way to prevent them from eating each other. And cannibalism is still very common. And the adults can be identified by the dark line that runs from their eye to their mouth on the side of their head. Their body is green, but it also has a lighter colored stripe on the top. And the eyes are coppery metallic in color. They're very beautiful, obviously, and they have sort of thread-like antenna. So hopefully if you see insects that look like that in your garden, you'll realize that they're green lacewings. The larvae are a little smaller, 6 to 10 millimeters in length. They have a flattened sort of alligator-like appearance, and they're gray to brown in color. They have long forceps-like mandibles that they use to consume various soft-bodied insects. You can find them within crops, in fields, or also in home gardens. The adults feed on nectar and pollen and honeydew. The larvae are generalist predators. They're very voracious. They can travel up to 100 feet in search of prey, and they're able to eat up to 400 aphids per week, and hence the nickname aphid lions. Common prey are, of course, the aphids, but they're also they prey on caterpillars, thrips, mites, mealybugs, and various other soft-bodied insects. So as adults, I mentioned that they do eat nectar and pollen, and these are some of the plants that they're particularly attracted to. Many of them are in the carrot or aster family. They're flowers with an open sort of blossom that makes it easy for them to be able to extract the pollen. The next insect is a member of the fly family, so it's the syrphid fly. They're around the same size as the lacewings, 8 to 20 millimeters. They also have a complete life cycle. Among their common names are hoverflies and flower flies. They're called hoverflies because they do hover. They're extremely good flyers. They can hover at up to 300 beats per second, and they often do that when they're trying to attract a mate. They have this false vein that sort of runs down the center of their wings, which is quite distinctive, another way of being able to identify them. And so they're, as I said, they're very good flyers. They're often confused with bees and wasps. The difference between hoverflies and bees and wasps, though, is that hoverflies have fly-like eyes, so they're compound eyes, and they cover a very large portion of their head, whereas a bee has eyes on the side of its head. And also, one of the very distinctive things about wasps is that they have a cinched waist, and hoverflies, as you can see, have a thicker waist. One of the things they like to do is to imitate bees and wasps, and it's a defensive behavior. They're trying to, in the face of a predator, they're trying to appear more fearsome in order to, to deter that predator. And this behavior is called Batesian mimicry, and it was named after the first gentleman, Henry Walter Bates, who actually observed it. So females lay their eggs near colonies of pests. They're very efficient that way. They're able to sense the size of a pest colony and adjust the numbers of eggs that they lay. When the eggs hatch, the slug-like larvae begin feeding. So this is an image of a syrphid fly larva. So obviously they look very different from the adult, as most insects do. Their primary habitat, they do like flowers. They can be found in habitats with abundant flowering plants. The adults consume nectar and pollen, and they can be important pollinators. The larvae are generalist predators, and so they target many of the things that lacewings do as well. But they're particularly important at controlling aphid infestations early in the season when cooler temperatures inhibit other predators. So this is just a list of some of the prey that they are interested in. And also, again, some of the plant species that attract them for pollen and nectar. Next, I'm going to talk about parasitoid wasps. They're a very complex, diverse group of insects. So as you can see, there's a huge range here in terms of the size. Some are the size of a fleck of pepper, and others are quite a bit larger. They also have a complete life cycle, so going through the 4 stages. They're also very different in their appearance. So some are banded, like this 5-banded typhid wasp. Others are a single color, a single dark color. And some are brightly colored. So there is a lot of variation in this family of insects. They're difficult to spot in the garden as well because as larvae, they reside inside hosts. And then as pupa, they're in a rice-like cocoon until they emerge from the cocoon as adults. And many of the adults are quite small. So one of the things that they do share, though, is they all have slender bodies with a narrow waist. The females have an ovipositor, which is this structure right here, which protrudes from their abdomen, and they use their ovipositor to lay eggs either singly or in groups on, inside, or near a host. Some species are even able to penetrate wood. In the case of this stump stabber here, that's the common name of that particular wasp. So they're able to penetrate wood in order to parasitize the insect larva below. The larvae develop on or inside the host, as I said previously, feeding on it, but usually not killing the host until the wasp larvae reach maturity and pupate. Adult wasps emerge and seek out new hosts to repeat the cycle. They can be found as well with foraging near flowers with shallow blooms. Some of the targeted hosts are that wasps are interested in are very specific, and so in many cases they're highly effective at regulating pest populations in the insect species that they're interested in parasitizing. Some of the common hosts that they target are the eggs, larvae, or adults of aphids, whiteflies, scales, caterpillars, flies, and many, many more. There's a long list of prey insects for wasps. They're attracted to plantings that have flowering plants throughout the season, and for the most part, species in the carrot, bean, sunflower, and mint family. The final group of insects, the final group that I'm going to go through are spiders. They're actually not insects, they're arachnids. The adults range in size from 6 to 25 millimeters. Spiders have 8 legs, 2 main body parts, an abdomen, and a cephalothorax. They, for the most part, they have 4 pairs of eyes, no antenna, and no wings. The orb weavers are also called garden spiders, and many of them are brightly colored, as you can see from the photos, in yellow, green, and red. And they can build very impressive webs, sometimes with a central zigzag pattern or with a more traditional spoked pattern. And they often catch more prey than they can actually consume. and so spiders, along with predaceous spider mites and centipedes, are important predators in the garden ecosystem. They prey on insects either by trapping them in their webs, or there's a group of spiders called cursorial spiders, and they catch their prey basically by jumping on them. But they're also very useful spiders in the garden because they're highly mobile. Common prey for spiders are flies, mosquitoes, moths, beetles, wasps, and other pests. And even though they're not pollinators, there are ways to attract them to the garden. Number one would be to leave their webs intact as much as possible. Also, having tall plants in your garden provides a space for them to be able to build their webs. They also like to shelter from dry air and sunlight on the ground under mulch or leaves. So leaving mulch and some leaf litter around is something that they appreciate. You can also leave structures in your garden, say a planting pot that you lay on its side, which not only gives spiders some shelter, but also gives them a place to build a web. And because they do like to shelter on the ground, adopting a no-till approach to the garden is a good idea. So the final part of my presentation deals with or provides just some general recommendations for attracting and maintaining beneficials. And one of the most important things is to maintain a pesticide-free environment. So fewer chemical inputs will result in a greater and more diverse group of beneficial insects that you can attract to your garden. When pesticides are used, beneficials are not only sprayed, but they also consume the contaminated spray. So it's an even bigger problem for them. And pesticides may eliminate a pest population, but there's always a few that are resistant and that will pass along the trait to their offspring. And then you're just left with a bigger problem. So as much as possible, I think we always recommend that gardeners do their best to avoid pesticides. It's important to select native plants. Our native plants have evolved along with beneficials over many years. And so they have the right sort of flower structure to be able to best serve beneficials in the garden. A garden with good diversity of local native flora will soon attract a good diversity of local beneficial insects. Native plants are more valuable as well because they serve our native bees and are also larval food for butterflies and moth species. So this is just a list of the groups of flowers that attract beneficial insects and some of the individual plants that you can consider. So mainly it's the carrot family, the aster family, the legume and mustard family. There are others in addition to this, but these are the main groups. And as Ellen mentioned, I will be leaving a list of references behind it, and there's a lot of that type of information in those references. So another important consideration to attract and maintain beneficials is to have a good number of host plants in your beds and gardens. You can either have a garden bed that's entirely devoted to plants that attract beneficials, or you can insert them in your garden beds with other plants. It doesn't really matter. What's really important is that you have enough to allow beneficials to be well fed over the course of the summer, so that they'll stick around and be there for future pest outbreaks. Another strategy for using beneficials is to incorporate the right companion plant to protect a vulnerable species. So for instance, in this case, this is lettuce that's potentially could be attacked by aphids. One of the things that you could do is add sweet alyssum to your bed where you have your lettuce, and you'll be able to attract insects like certain types of wasps and also syrphid flies that will be right near the lettuce, and so potentially the beneficials will attack those pest insects before they cause any damage. I know this is a strategy that's used by organic farmers in California who are producing lettuce. And what they do is they'll have a row of lettuce beside, or they'll have rows of sweet alyssum in between their rows of lettuce to provide that biocontrol. It's also important to have plants blooming throughout the summer season so that there's something there for beneficials to forage on at all times. So having a succession of blooms is important, as well as a variety of different structure of those plants. And then finally, it's important to leave your garden standing in the fall. Beneficials need shelter and food over the winter months, which is when they're in hibernation. And it not only benefits insects, but it also benefits other creatures that you probably want to your garden as well. And it's recommended that you not start your cleanup until temperatures are above the 10 degrees Celsius range. And then finally, installing accessible sources of water throughout the summer months is a good thing to do for insects. Just a low saucer is a great idea with some pebbles. That way they're not going to fall in and drown. And so it's certainly it's appreciated by the insects and also by a lot of other creatures in the garden. And you can have any type of water feature and maybe even attract some garter snakes. So thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Well, thanks so much, Hariette. That was great. I learned a lot. I came in with a bunch of questions, and I think you've answered most of them. The photographs are beautiful as well, too. So let's go to the questions. I know that some people have been asking them in the chat. Everybody feel free to ask your questions as they occur to you while we're chatting, and watch out for any additional information that's in the chat and not what we're talking about. So let's have a look and see what our first question is. I know some of them have been answered in the chat, but I think what we'll do is go forward with some of those. Some questions from Dee Dee and Jim about dealing with grubs in the lawn. How are these only the larvae of bad insects? How do we tell the difference if there's some good ones hiding below our lawn? Are they all good? Are they bad or mixed?
Well, if they're attacking your, the roots of your lawn, then I'm not sure I understand the question. Most of the grubs that we see that are in the lawn are certainly not good insects, or they're the larvae of Japanese beetles, and so one of the ways of dealing with them is with beneficial nematodes, which they're able to kill the grubs, and then it's less of a problem. Having grubs in your lawn also attracts other animals like skunks and raccoons who will tear up the lawn in order to be able to get to the grubs. So they do cause problems.
Okay, good. Janet mentions in the chat that that you can pull up a square foot of your turf and count how many grubs you find. If you've got 10 or more, you may want to take a look at whether there's a problem. But if you're finding less, then it may not be an issue. And she also mentioned the Japanese beetle issue. And in the chat, there's a link to some really good management techniques for Japanese beetles from our website. Okay, that's good. Oh yeah. Here, do mosquito dunks in water harem? Let's see, do mosquito dunks in water harem beneficials? Let's see, I'm not quite sure.
I think it's harm beneficials.
Harm. Not so good at the typos. Okay, do mosquito dunks in water harm beneficials?
So mosquito dunks?
I think that's something you put in to get rid of the mosquito larvae in your standing water, I'm assuming.
And so the question is, do they harm beneficials?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't. I'm not. I don't see how they could. Sorry, I'm having trouble understanding that question.
Not a problem. Well, the sort of thing that we can look into this, and we can get back to you.
Right.
Yeah. An email. An email will always find us, and we'll always answer your questions. That gives us a bit of time to do a little research. Let's see. Here's a question from Terry. Is it a 10-degree day temperature, or do we need to wait until the night temperatures are also above 10 degrees? And I think that might be about beneficial nematodes, Terry. I'm not quite sure.
Or is it about the temperature before you start to get into the garden in the spring?
Yeah.
That may be it as well.
Yes,
I would say that it would be daytime temperature that you should probably be thinking about before. Nighttime temperature is likely to be lower than that, I'm thinking.
Okay, great. Let's see. Are there any predators for Japanese beetles? Diana wants to know.
Well, they are an invasive species, and I think that's the problem with Japanese beetles, is that they don't have any native predators. Now, I don't know whether any have been introduced to try and control them. But again, I'd be happy to try and get an answer for that.
I know most of the Japanese beetle traps that I've seen use pheromones. They attract the Japanese beetles. So the idea is you put them in your neighbor's garden, I guess, and not yours. But don't think you'll make very many friends that way.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that those pheromone traps are all that effective either. I think usually what's recommended to deal with Japanese beetles is the hand picking approach. And so, in the mornings when they're less mobile, it's easier to be able to flick them off into a pail of soapy water.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Sharon is wondering if this relationship between the sort of the companion issue that you pointed out with lettuce and sweet alyssum, if this is the reason that some plant marigolds in their vegetable gardens.
Yes, it's sort of the same concept. There are a lot of sort of old, sort of old wives' tales about planting this with that. But there are more and more people within the scientific community who've done a lot of research on these topics, and so there are reasons why it's essentially attracting the beneficial insects to be able to deal with the pest insects that make the difference with those types of things. And there's a lot more research that's been done in the agricultural area with plant partners, not as much in the home garden area.
Okay, good. Let's see what else. Oh, Claudette's got a couple of pieces of information in the chat for us. She notes that dragonflies, which are predators, breed in water. So I think that may go with mosquito dunking. And then Claudette has a nice link and a long list of predators of Japanese beetles, including birds, spiders, and other insects. So
Okay.
it's all there with the link.
Great.
She notes that people have recommended a handheld vacuum for large infestations. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's good. I know that I have a bucket of soapy water. The great thing about Japanese beetles is you just touch the plant they're on and they think they're so clever dropping to the ground, but they actually drop into the bucket of soapy water you're holding below them. Let's see. Oh, Claudette, you're just a font of information as well as being our tech support. So she talks about the, how do you pronounce that? It's a word I read but don't say. Tachinid fly?
Tachinid flies, right.
Yeah, so it parasitizes Japanese beetles.
Okay.
There you go. Let's see. So what questions have I missed here? Anybody see anything I missed? If Claudette, if you want to have a look, I just have a much more general question I'd like to ask Hariette, and that's, you know, as we learn these things, we're all learning all the time about our gardening. If you were to think back at your own garden, is there anything that you would do differently now that you've spent the last year or two immersing yourself in beneficial insects?
Well, I'd certainly pay more attention to it, and you know, if you don't know that these insects are able to provide this service, then you really, you know, you don't necessarily see the value in it. So I would certainly plant more native plants to attract them, and be aware of, you know, the types of plants that do attract them. And so I'd probably add a lot more of those plants to my garden, including herbs, which they're also attracted to, dill and basil and lots of other things.
Parsley, I think too, yeah.
Right.
Good.
So
Sue Hobson comments that tachinid flies may also parasitize monarch caterpillars, which of course would be a problem. Any comments about that, Hariette?
I'm really not, I really don't know what they,
Yeah. Okay.
But again, we can certainly, if your questions in the chat, we can provide a response.
Okay. And something from Dee Dee and Jim. They're wondering about carpenter bees, if they're beneficial because they're hollowing out their wood structures and they want to get rid of them.
Well, I can certainly understand that. It would be a big concern for me as well if I had carpenter bees and they were putting holes in my siding, for instance. I guess the one thing I would say is that they are pollinators, so they do provide that service. I know from just doing some research on them that you know, one of the ways to avoid having that type of problem is to make sure that there aren't any sort of places where you know, in the structure of your home or your fence or whatever it is, where they can get a toehold. So anytime you do have evidence of carpenter bees, make sure to fill the holes, and I understand paint is better than stain to deter them from, you know, from trying to build their nests, essentially.
Good. Any other questions that I have missed? Anybody have anything? Have I missed anything in the chat? We covered a lot of ground. Oh, let's see. Claudette comments that around the monarch caterpillars, that it's a natural relationship that has co-evolved over time. And the issue is that monarch populations have fallen below a sustainable level, and it's a huge environmental problem associated in part with the loss of native plants. So in the olden days, that wouldn't have been an issue because everything was balanced, but as their natural environments are disappearing, their
Right.
monarchs are threatened. Okay, good. All right, well, if more questions come up, don't forget that you can send them to our Gmail account, haltonmastergardeners@gmail.com, and we'll certainly try and answer them, do a little bit of research. I just want to thank Hariette on behalf of all of us for sharing your time and your expertise with us. I want to thank everybody who joined us today. If anybody on the webinar wants to support the work our volunteers do, feel free to send us a donation via e-transfer to the same email address. We'll also be really interested in knowing what topics you might be interested in for future presentations. If you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter or blog, you can do so on the website. Don't forget about our Twitter and Instagram accounts either. And sad to say, our last webinar in the series is coming up. It will be over soon. So next Friday, Bev Wagar and Kate Sue will be presenting Your Nature-Friendly Garden Throughout the Year. And it just sort of pulls everything together. Kate and Bev are going to show us how to keep our garden looking good in a nature-friendly way. So we hope to see you again, everyone. If anybody has a question they didn't get a chance to ask, the webinar's over now, but we'll stay behind for a few minutes so that you'll get a chance to ask a question now. But the formal part is over. So thanks very much. And we hope to see you next week. Bye, everyone.